256 fatal overdoses of opioids in the city of St. Louis. That's more than the murder rate. In the region, 650 died in 2016, and almost 2,000 were saved by an overdose because of drugs. Sunil Menzies, friend of the show, sponsor of the show. You live on the front lines as executive director of ARCA here. When you read, first of all, thanks for coming in.
No problem. Thanks for having us.
When you read this story, you probably knew it was coming out. You live this every day. Accurate? Is it worse than this story is depicting? Better? What are your thoughts as you read this story?
So I think it's accurate in terms of the scope of the problem, McGraw. It's got to be one of the worst epidemics our city, our country. It's a global conversation,
right?
But on a as the article talks about, on a national and kind of state level conversation, it's as bad as we've gotten. It's worse in the sense that the media, the public continue to talk about the problem.
Right.
We've discussed this before. This article outlines the problem perfectly. 256 deaths that have been reported. As they said, there's toxicology reports that come back. We don't know how many unreported deaths are going on out there.
Right.
Nowhere in the article did it talk about a solution.
Right.
So we have talked about the problem, which is fantastic. The National Council has done a great job.
Right.
The media did a great job. We didn't talk about a solution in there. So everyone has read this knowing there's a killer running around our streets. How do you stop it?
Right. But it seems like the rehab community hasn't settled on a solution. You talk to 16 people in the rehab community, you get 16 different answers.
No definition. So you can go talk about, so in here they talked about methadone, great medication for certain patients. There's other options that need to be discussed, but we don't have a defined, we don't have, the recovery is not defined.
Right.
Like you said, if you go and ask someone, I'm having heart surgery, I'm having a knee replacement, they'll tell
Right.
you exactly from step 1 through 5 what's going to happen.
Right.
You tell someone you're going to recovery, you might be going to California to hang out on the beach.
Right.
You might be going down to Alabama to...
Right. Or you might go to ARCA, which, whatever. But your father, which has educated so many people on this, and me as well, he often refers to it back to the broken arm. You have a broken arm, you go to the doctor. There's a general rule of thumb on how to solve a broken arm. Right? You might need a plate, you might need a cast, it might be on for 6 weeks or 7 weeks, but there's a general rule of thumb how to fix a broken arm. There is no standard to come back from heroin abuse.
And you saw it in the comments. If you read the comments about this article that the community had put up, there was a battle going on in those 72 comments about it is a disease, it's not a disease, it's willpower, it's not willpower, it's their fault, it's not their fault.
Right.
What the research has shown and what we and what science understands now is the most effective way to treat what we believe, those in the field, truly is a science, evidence-based kind of treatable brain disorder. It really is a disease.
Right.
As the article said, and as we know, no one has said, I tried it once and I quit.
Right.
It has an amazing, amazing ability to change the chemistry of an individual's brain to the point that they have to have it to feel normal.
It's so interesting because maybe it's both, right? Maybe you get started because you should have said no. Maybe you should have hung with a better crowd. Maybe you should have had the willpower. But at some point, the willpower alone oftentimes isn't enough to break the habit, whether it's smoking, drinking, running, exercising, right? People become addicted to exercise. People become addicted to quote-unquote good things as opposed to bad things. Maybe it's a little bit of both, and your point is, who cares? Let's try and help solve the problem.
We have people dying. Who cares?
Right.
I mean, whether it was my depression that got me to use, or I was bored one day and my best friend told me, or I broke my arm and my doctor gave me 90 Vicodin when he should have given me 3.
Right.
That doesn't matter. On the front end, can we make a case to say there was an option of willpower? Of course. We
Sure.
could have made better decisions.
Right.
But if I come to you and tell you as a friend, I want to lose 30 pounds, I'm not going to eat for 5, 10, 12 days, you're going to laugh at me. My brain will tell my body through physical symptoms, if you don't eat, you're going to die.
Right.
And we saw that here. Overdoses after overdose after overdose, friends dying. These two individuals' stories about overdose, 6 months pregnant.
Right.
The brain says, if you don't have it, you'll be dead.
Yeah. So, the argument about methadone versus Suboxone versus naltrexone, the one that you guys use, it seems like if I was able to kick the habit from methadone, that's the only way that works for everybody, right? If I'm an alcoholic and I go to AA, that's the only way that works, and I'm not going to deviate from that because, by golly, it saved me, and that's the only way to fix it for everybody else.
So it's not defined. And if we keep calling it a quote-unquote social or moral failure versus a disease, then everyone's going to have their own input as to how you treat it. We don't call diabetes or hypertension, even though it was talked about in the article. We don't call that a moral or personal failing. Some people may say you could have eaten better, you could have smoked less, whatever the case was.
Right.
But because we recognize when it gets to the point that we call it hypertension, diabetes, or cancer, it's a disease, there's a defined way to treat it. Substance abuse, it's a social failing. It's the person's fault. So if it's my fault, then it's easy to say, well, I got over it a certain way, so can you.
Yeah. Where are we in terms of local, state, national government? Are they solving the problem? Are they making the problem worse? Are they even trying to tackle it? Where are we? I know it's a loaded question.
Yeah, I think
it's only a 4-hour show.
I think everyone is doing a great job, as I said, of bringing attention. So we had the CARE Act from Obama before he left office, where he's put in a large amount of funding to attack the opioid epidemic across the country. The Department of Mental Health here, the Department of Behavioral Health in Missouri, is is really the forefront and the leader in terms of state funding, state resources for those who are struggling.
Right.
Unfortunately, even all the resources that the department and those in Jeff City are putting behind this problem is not enough to combat it. I think we're seeing our local first responders, our paramedics, our firefighters, our police doing their very best to understand how do I respond the third, the fourth, the fifth time to the same individual who's overdosed and I brought back to life.
Talk about being inhumane to somebody. You bring them back to life 3, 4, 5 times. They're instantaneously alive through the magic of medicine, and we pat them on the back and send them on their way to do it again tomorrow night.
Right, exactly. And that's where we've said we've got to be able, everyone in the community, not the mistake, but the thing that we have to be able to do better is arm ourselves with a solution. Whether I'm a first responder, whether I'm a mother, whether I'm a doctor, whether I'm a friend, I have to be able to recognize signs that are involved in mental health and being emotionally unhealthy, because this starts at a young age. You've heard the story. Very few people are saying I was 42 and started using. I was 14.
Right.
I got my mom's pain pills, or I was depressed. Someone told me I could feel better.
Right.
We're a hedonistic society. We need to feel better. We're told we should feel okay. And we have young people, so we have to get armed with the solution. But in terms of what we're doing, we're on the right track. We're trying to fight the opioid epidemic, but we aren't providing viable solutions. Access to care is still a real issue.
Right. Last question for you, Sunil, and we're going to talk about it more with Jesse Bogan, who wrote the story in the Post-Dispatch in the 9 o'clock hour. They're trying to clamp down on opioid prescription drugs from doctors, but if you read the article and you talk to people on the front line, it sounds like access to heroin or these opioid drugs isn't the problem. They can get it instantaneously in their locker in high school if they want it.
So we've all heard it. The Surgeon General, the highest ranking medical official in the country, for the first time ever wrote to every physician in the country saying, we have a major problem. You need to be mindful and careful of your writing of opioid-based pain medications. Unfortunately, the message came out a long time ago that it's the only cure for chronic pain,
right?
Which may not be the case. But as you were saying, there is no shortage. We went back in 2009, 2010 and started coming up with different formulations of these pain medications, which could be snorted, injected, abused.
Right.
Well, and the PARMA study came out of WashU. So what did we see? A major drop in the use of pain pills and a 54% increase in the use of heroin in St. Louis. If I don't have one, I'm going to find the other. We have legalized marijuana. We continue to do it throughout the country.
Right.
The heroin's coming from 3 countries, Burma, Afghanistan. The major producer now, Mexico.
Right.
Mexican farmers have realized, I don't have my cash crop in marijuana. I've got to find an alternative. The opium poppy is an easy one. I can funnel heroin through here. And then you've got major cartels that have been set up.
Well, and you know, if it's going to cost $6,000 to go to rehab in Malibu for 6 months, or $5 to get high, right? I mean,
cheaper than a pint of beer.
Yeah.
I mean, you can go out and get, as the article called it, a button or a dose of heroin. We could walk half a mile in any direction from this, from your station right here, and we could go find it. And price and availability will continue to drive an epidemic.
Right.
Will continue to fuel what's necessary in terms of feeling normal.
Let me ask you this crazy question. Do you think legalizing heroin might be the answer?
I think there's conversation.
And giving people, walk into a room and say rehab on one side, heroin on the other side?
I think long term it could provide a solution to the mortality rate. on the front end, we'll see a spike. I mean, we'll go through a generational
walking
cultural
zombies,
change,
yeah.
right? We'll go through a cultural change of something that's been so taboo is now quote unquote legal.
Right.
That I think the country will have to learn how to tackle.
I mean, we're seeing stories like, was it Seattle where they sort of have a heroin park?
Canada's now doing a syringe exchange program.
Right.
The concept has been, if the price and the access and availability to the drug is so high, and if funding continues to be such a challenge for those in treatment, that's one of the beauties of ARCA. We can provide treatment really to those who are uninsured all the way to those who need something very confidential and private.
Right.
But with access being limited, one of the thoughts has been, and with the epidemic being as out of control as it is, one of the thoughts has been, do we provide safe alternatives to use? And they've seen it with other epidemics, whether that was the AIDS epidemic in Africa. We tried to provide, condom exchange and education on sex. But the medications or the needles or the clean heroin or the medical grade heroin will not be the answer. It will help curb the problem. Ultimately, prevention, as the NCADA is doing, education, and then if it's too late, treatment are what are going to ultimately save lives.
Percy, you help run ARCA, the Assisted Recovery Centers of America, ARCAMidwest.com, sponsor of the show. Your father educated me on this years ago, and you guys have been on the front lines. And I will say, at a fraction of the cost of going to Malibu for 6 months, you guys are seeing results right here in St. Louis, because one of the things you guys believe in is getting the addict back into their environment as soon as possible.
No one has ever come to us in the however many years, 18 years we've done this, and said, Percy, Neil, ARCA, my goal 6 years ago was to be dependent to heroin, was to be a professional attorney using alcohol. Oftentimes it stems from our emotional health, our inability to say, I feel healthy, I feel okay. And that has to ultimately, the rubber meets the road in the natural environment.
Right.
And that's where we learn to really ultimately figure out how to become healthy, which then leads us to not need the medication.
ARCAMidwest.com for more information. Sunil Menzies with ARCA, Executive Director. Thanks for the insight.
Yeah, and we appreciate, McGraw, as always, the continued fight and your passion to bring this to the forefront.
I mean, it's a bigger problem than the murder rate in the city of St. Louis, and no one talks about it.
It's the biggest epidemic we've probably seen in 10 years here.
Sad stuff. Check that, 732, Big 550, KTR.